Hello, comrades. I'd like to advise you all ahead of time to have a little bottle of milk handy, because this is going to be a spicy one. Here's why. So, if that appeared like the ramblings of a tin hat wearing lunatic, you're not alone. But you'll notice that this individual here posted a link, and it's that link that I'd like to talk about today. The video sent to me by Tinfoil Tim was a seemingly half-scripted exposing of the Fabian Society by a channel known as, and this is not a joke, Truthstream Media. I'm going to put it out there now. I figured that with a channel of over 500,000 subscribers, he could probably afford a good enough education to at least learn to read. Sadly, that doesn't appear to be the case. So, to make things simple, I'm going to start with the easiest claims to debunk and slowly work my way to the ones that require a little more nuance. So to begin, Orwell was never, and I mean never, a
satanic commie fascist.
As if communist fascist is a coherent political ideology at all. However, he was a lifelong socialist, going as far as to state whilst on his deathbed, my novel, 1984, is not intended as an attack on socialism. So, even if you go ahead and conflate
satanic commie fascist
with socialist, you would be wrong that he rejected that ideology late in life. But that quick conflation leads me directly to the next issue. I believe that Truthstream Media has the same types of misconceptions as our basement-dwelling buddy here. You see, for some reason, this image flashes on the screen sometimes in this video. So the top half of that image is trying to show that the fundamental basis for society in 1984 is founded on the principles of INGSOC, or English socialism. If none of that means anything to you, don't worry, I'm going to get to it. Remember, I'm starting out easy. See, one of the misconceptions they seem to share is that people who claim an ideology are always actually of that ideology. It's the classic, did you know that Nazi stood for National Socialist? Therefore, Nazis are socialists. Chuckwait Lubcuck. Even though, really, anyone above a 6th grade reading level should know that the actual socialists inside the NSDAP recognized that Hitler was co-opting socialist talking points and then enacting anti-socialist policies. It's like something pretending to be something else, like a something in something else's clothing. That escapes me. Probably not important. Anyway, George Orwell distinctly used INGSOC as a nod to the Nazis, who were fascists, not socialists. If you would like a full-length debunk of Nazis were socialists, I recommend 3 Arrows video on it. Link in the description. So, before we get to the actual video, quick synopsis of 1984 for those of you that haven't read it. 1984 is a dystopian novel in which the protagonist Winston Smith experiences the atrocities of a totalitarian state. The party, led by Big Brother, controls the state and works to remove dissent and unorthodoxy by punishing unorthodox thoughts and rewriting history. They also control the actions of individuals with advanced surveillance technology and breed party loyalty through unending propagandized war with other nations which may or may not exist. In short, it's a bit of a hell world, one we should probably always seek to avoid. That quickly out of the way, let's get on with their video. So, I want to state now that the central claim of this video is that George Orwell named 1984 after the Fabian Society. Before I even speak of the Fabian Society or George Orwell's disposition of them, I'm going to tell you right now that this claim is never actually substantiated. The only evidence he provides is this quote right here.
George Orwell probably named his infamous book 1984 after the Fabian Socialist, as after all, they were founded in 1884, and they were explicitly proponents of gradualism, of change over time progressively through the decades, and so a century would be a very notable marker.
Yep, that is the only actual evidence provided. But even more telling than that is the fact that just after this statement, he explains the widely accepted theory for the name.
Although it's never been explained, a much more likely explanation comes in the fact that his wife, Eileen Blair, before they had met when she was still Eileen O'Shaughnessy, had just read Brave New World, which was published in 1932, and she wrote a poem in 1934 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of her high school, Sutherland High School magazine, that she called End of the Century 1984.
Again, not a joke. He defends the stance of, I know his wife wrote like one published poem ever, and that it had 1984 in the title, and that she died before he got to write the book, and that she picked the location where Orwell wrote most of the book, and that she died before she could even see that house. But honestly, it makes more sense that he would name it after an academic society that he had little to no personal attachment to, rather than memorialize his wife's work. And that's the issue with these types. All the evidence in the world can lead to an obvious and understandable conclusion, but they refuse to recognize it. Of course, I want people to be skeptical, but skepticism is about following the evidence wherever it leads, not ignoring it when it's convenient to do so. So, you would think, right now, after all of that it's time to get debunking. But the more I listen to this video, the more I realize that there isn't much to actually respond to. The first time I watched it, I ascribed my views to it and recognized how riddled with falsities it was. But on subsequent viewings, I noticed that he wasn't really saying anything. He makes some stupid statements here and there, but ultimately, he's just using scary words and phrases to draw up images of shady cabals of murderous, baby-eating,
satanic commie fascists
in the minds of his viewers. That being said, there are a few things I do want to address. So, let's start. And let's start with only the facts about the Fabian Society. The Fabian Society, founded in 1884, was a splinter group of the Fellowship of the New Life, both founded by Thomas Davidson. Davidson was a bit of an individualist, actually, so he didn't typically attend Fabian meetings, because while Davidson thought that the issues facing England could be solved by urging the individual to act more godlike, the Fabians followed a more Marxian approach to behavior, suggesting sweeping social changes instead. The early members, including Edward R. Peace and Sidney and Beatrice Webb, founded the London School of Economics and Political Science, and the society later became the foundation of the UK's Labour Party. In short, they were the first vestiges of intellectual socialism in the UK. If you've seen their video, you'll notice that most of what I've said is accurate with most of what they've said. So, what's really the problem here if their video's mostly accurate? Well, the issue is that this stuff flies off the handle real quick, but they keep an air of reality to it the whole time. For example, they take issue with the Fabians' name and iconography. The Fabians named themselves after Fabius Maximus because he was patient, and so were they. They used a tortoise with the caption, "When I strike hard," as their emblem. What? No, for real, I don't know what you're talking about. No, what shield? No, I mean, what? Oh, that shield. All right, so this is going to be a complicated one. While their emblem is the turtle, their crest is. Oh, yeah! That's what it was. That's what I couldn't remember earlier. Their crest is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Huh. Now, bear with me here, because the analogy has some awful connotations to it. But if you put yourself in Fabian's shoes, clogs? Penny loafers? Probably penny loafers. Anyway, if you put yourself in their shoes, it has a little more nuance to it. You see, in the original tale, the wolf isn't trying to trick the sheep, he's tricking the shepherd so he can steal the sheep. Of course, the wolf fully intends to eat the sheep when he gets back to his den, but imagine we transpose that sentiment where now the shepherd is the government or oppressive aristocracies or big businesses. The sheep are normal working people, oblivious to all manner of corruption and just worried simply about where their next meal comes from. So that leaves the wolf. Of course, the Fabians are the wolf, but unlike the wolf in the story, they're blending in so they can avoid the ire of the ruling class, not so they can eat poor people, that's cannibalism, but to steal them from the system they're being forced to suffer under. Don't forget, the shepherd is raising those sheep in bondage with the full intention of eating them in the end, no different from the wolf. So, the analogy was meant to describe their belief that slow, consistent coalition building would be more effective than full-scale revolution. If the wolf runs in and tears into as many sheep as he can, the shepherd's going to kill him. But if he sneaks in, he'll have food forever, assuming he doesn't get caught, of course. But as the video says, they abandoned it because of the negative connotations. However, can we stop pretending that these shadow groups are both so powerful that they can absolutely dominate an entire society, but at the same time so stupid that they would openly use the wolf in sheep's clothing emblem without any reason that doesn't somehow involve devouring infants or something awful like that? Please? So, the next thing I'm going to discuss is a spoiler for 1984. So if you don't want one of the best books I have ever read to be ruined for you, I suggest you move on to the timestamp on screen now. So in 1984, the protagonist meets a man named O'Brien, who introduces himself as an ally to the resistance. After Winston gets close to him, he is given the Forbidden Book, known as The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism, written by the enemy of the party and Big Brother, Emmanuel Goldstein. And it's at this point I'd like to make a quick distinction for further progress. So, when I refer to 1984, I will call it 1984. When I refer to the book inside of 1984, I will refer to it as the book, because it's going to get real confusing otherwise. Of course, rooting against Big Brother, the reader wants to see an ideological clash between the tenets of Goldstein and that of Ingsoc. However, eagle-eyed viewers will notice that the book's ideas almost seem to bolster the theories of the party. For example, chapters 1 and 3, and presumably 2, are titled after the three party slogans: war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Chapter 1, Ignorance is Strength, what we get to see of it, seems to do more to describe the party's behavior than to actually condemn it. It's assumed that there was always some sort of actual condemnation of the party inside of it, seeing as it was written by Goldstein, but we never actually get to see it. Instead, we get to see a justification of hierarchies of power, as if they're inevitable. This ambiguity is supposed to make the reader think, really think, about the meaning of the book. Why is it that everything we read in this book seems to justify the brutalities of the party? It's because the party has already applied the theory and practice of oligarchical collectivism. We know this not only because the ideology of that book and the party seem eerily similar, but also because of the fact that O'Brien, who turns out is an inner party spy, admits to writing the book with other inner party members, meaning Emmanuel Goldstein is likely a fictional phantom used to give the party members an outlet for their hatred, but also to suss out any dissenters to the party, as is the case with Winston in 1984. The book isn't really a description of what oligarchical collectivism is in practice. It's a tool to either bring back dissenters by convincing them that Big Brother is right through all the information and rhetoric found inside the book, or to allow them to be further radicalized by it and then subsequently vaporized. So, now that we've talked about it, how does it relate to what this idiot said about the Fabians? Well, ignorance is strength should be the first and foremost issue we take with it. The goal of the Fabians is to teach people about their ideology. They believe that allowing people to study the works of unorthodox thinkers can allow their minds to be opened and possibly even swayed. So, the Fabians seek to reach their goals through slow and deliberate education and democratic reformation, going as far as starting a school and a political party. Big Brother and the party believe that depriving the masses of education is the best way to achieve peace. They believe hierarchy cannot be circumvented, and only by eliminating the free thought of the proletariat could they maintain their power and stabilize society. The Fabians believe that knowledge is power, and the party literally believes that ignorance is strength. It doesn't take a genius to see that those two are diametrically opposed. You see, Orwell didn't put the book in 1984 in order to warn against collectivism. He put it in there to show how far fascists will go in order to maintain power, turning the socialist ideal of rule by the people on its head, and then building their society upside down to make it fit. Not eliminating commodities, but controlling them. Not giving the means of production to the worker, but instead to the state. Orwell knew very well that he wasn't writing about actual collectivism, because there isn't a shred of collectivism in 1984. Collectivism would be a removal of hierarchy, but the book, and subsequently the party, regard it as something that has to be and constantly will be preserved. So no, the book within a book has nothing to do with the Fabians. Not at all.
So this is the part where I lean in and whisper that I just made you waste 5 minutes of your life on an unnecessary explanation. Here's why. So, in 1984, doublethink is the ability to hold completely conflicting beliefs at the same time. For example, believing that something is both entirely black and entirely white. Now follow me here. Oligarchy is when power is unevenly placed in the hands of only the wealthy people. Collectivism is when power is placed evenly in the hands of all the people. Handful of people, all people. See, if you believed the title was legitimate, you fell for Orwell's trap. The title of the book is Doublethink, classically. And boy, my friend, did you fall for it.
All right, so I think now is the time to be a little bit fair. Of course, there are things that we disagree on, but I would like to give him a break. So, based on what I've read, Aldous and Julian Huxley were kind of terrible people by today's standards. Eugenics is generally bad, so not really a fan of Julian Huxley. Aldous is a good writer, but not really the best human. And I do agree that the early Fabians were a little bit too hands-off for my taste. It does seem like they really just wanted to eliminate poverty, not for the benefit of the masses, but instead more because they were tired of looking at the filth out in the streets, which is probably why they supported eugenics and imperialism, you know? I do want to clarify, though, that when they speak of eliminating poverty, potentially with violence, they didn't mean slaughtering poor people. Duh. They meant taking up arms against those with their boots on the neck of poor people. You can eliminate poverty and the things that cause poverty without executing the poor people. However, I do think it's time for my last real deep dive of this video. I want to begin by saying, stop talking about H.G. Wells like you know anything about him. H.G. Wells was a fantastic role model for his time. He supported American civil rights before the movement itself even began in America, finishing his work, The Rights of Man, detailing why all humans, regardless of age, race, gender, or sexual orientation, deserved equality under the law everywhere. 25 years before Rosa Parks would refuse to give up her seat in Montgomery. His book was explicitly cited as a primary inspiration for both the Sankey Declaration of the Rights of Man and the 1984 UN Declaration of Human Rights. He even helped found the League of Nations. He wrote many, many books of both fiction and nonfiction about class struggle and how to ameliorate the damage done to the lower class by the capitalist class. There are many issues I have taken with your interpretations of Wells' work, most of which it's quite obvious you haven't seemed to have read. But before I get to that, I would like to address a potential elephant in the room before it comes in. Eugenics. Yes, Wells was related to the movement of eugenics. You see, eugenics was separated out into two forms. Positive eugenics, the type originating from Francis Galton and practiced by the Nazis, which aims to make a perfect organism by trying to breed good qualities into the human race and preventing those with bad qualities from being able to procreate with those that have purely good qualities. And the second is negative eugenics, the practice of trying to eliminate negative traits from the gene pool. You see, Wells believed that positive eugenics was ill-formed and likely impossible. He believed that only by eliminating negative genes, like blindness or deafness at birth, could human well-being actually be improved through eugenics. That's still pretty horrifying, honestly, actually terrifying. However, in The Rights of Man, he makes it very clear that he believed any coercive methods, like forced sterilization, for example, would be unethical, stating that human rights include a prohibition on mutilation, sterilization, torture, and any other bodily punishment. So, did he support eugenics? Kind of. He said it was okay on paper, I guess, but that there was no real way to control the human gene pool without grievous human rights violations. So, mixed bag? You see, eugenics is absolutely, and I will say it with confidence, absolutely H.G. Wells' worst take. So I figured I'd address it as early as possible. That way I don't have to hear back something along the lines of, "You didn't mention his eugenics policies though, did you?" So let's move on to the first issue I take, which is when you say that Orwell laid out Wells and undermined Hitler in Wells, Hitler, in the World State. Clearly, the 2,000 words in that document was significantly too much for you to actually read because you definitely didn't read it. While Orwell did criticize Wells, he didn't lay out his way of thinking as much as he yearned for the ideals Wells was espousing to actually come true. Remember this part, because it'll be useful later. Wells believed that religion and nationalism were obsolete, and that the world would naturally leave them behind. Orwell simply says that he wishes, truly wishes, that it was actually that way, but it's not. A decade or so before aeroplanes were technically feasible, Wells knew that within a little while, men would be able to fly. He knew that because he himself wanted to be able to fly, and therefore felt sure that research in that direction would continue. On the other hand, even when I was a little boy, at a time when the Wright brothers had actually lifted their machine off the ground for 49 seconds. The generally accepted opinion was that if God meant for us to fly, he would have given us wings. Up to 1914, Wells was in the main a true prophet. In physical details, his vision of the new world has been fulfilled to a surprising extent. Here, he shows that Wells has been right often when basing his judgments on science and not religion. But in the case of Hitler's nationalism, he was wrong, and the Nazi regime proved that religion and nationalism were likely a mainstay of human civilization, no matter how irrational they may be. And I challenge you to find anywhere in that an example of Orwell undermining Hitler. But that leads me to the next document you definitely haven't read, The Open Conspiracy. This is your synopsis of it, and I quote, "Sounds open, but it's also very deceptive. They state it openly, but they bring it in quietly, gradually, so that nobody notices. I mean, it's evil, but it's genius, basically." Huh. Nope, that's it. Nope, that's it. I can't. They broke me. I'm done. I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't. So that nonsense happened. Of course, I know you didn't read The Open Conspiracy, but could you at least say something of substance, please? So, The Open Conspiracy, for the uninitiated here, is a book wherein Wells describes an open conspiracy. Go figure. But what is this great open conspiracy? Is it like if you look in the mirror and say Hideo Kojima 5 times in the dark, you'll die, but we'll all actually get a new Silent Hill, and nobody wants to really miss the pre-release, so no one's actually willing to take one for the team on that one? Because that's the type of open conspiracy I could get behind. You know what? Let's see what Wells had to say about it. It seemed to me that all over the world, intelligent people were waking up to the indignity and absurdity of being endangered, restrained, and impoverished by a mere uncritical adhesion to traditional governments, traditional ideas of economic life, and traditional forms of behavior, and that these awakening intelligent people must constitute first a protest and then a creative resistance to the inertia that was stifling and threatening us. It amounted to a protest, first mental and then practical. It amounted to a sort of unpremeditated and unorganized conspiracy against the fragmentary and insufficient governments and the widespread greed, appropriation, clumsiness, and waste that are now going on. But unlike conspiracies in general, this widening protest and conspiracy against established things would, by its very nature, go on in the daylight, and it would be willing to accept participation and help from every quarter. In fact, it would become an open conspiracy. So, unfortunately, the Kojima conspiracy wasn't Wells's open conspiracy, but it does seem like the conspiracy is against oppressive governments and social structures. Everyone that wakes up, according to him, will be accepted as a member into this conspiracy, and they will talk about this conspiracy in the open. What he's talking about isn't some sort of shady cabal of overall-wearing Big Brother worshippers coming to attack your freedoms and take them from you, although that narrative is clearly more entertaining. No. What he's writing about is an unorganized movement of people wondering why it is that politicians and CEOs are allowed to enjoy a luxurious life, but the common factory worker lives destitute and in constant struggle. It seemed unfair to Wells that those who did the most work didn't seem to enjoy a comparative lifestyle. His conspiracy, if you could call it that in today's terms, seems to resemble the type of conspiracy that Winston Smith actually engages in 1984, when he refuses to mentally bow down to his oppressors. If more party members were waking up like Winston had, they could have potentially risen up against Big Brother. And that, to never break, never falter, to stand together, no matter who we are or where we live, united. That's the open conspiracy. So, lastly, before I try and move on, I would like to talk about one of potentially the most misused quotes in history. The opium of the masses. So, usually the quote refers to something that will, I guess, pacify the common folk. And in that usage, it's mostly right. But you see, the way you use it is so far off the money, it's homeless. So it should be said now that the original quote is attributed firstly to Karl Marx, who stated that religion was the opium of the people, not the masses. He meant that religion would ease the pains of the people, but also leave them weak and ignorant to their ongoing suffering. Wells' view on religion was a little different. Remember that thing I told you to remember because it would be important later? Well, it's later now. You see, Wells believed that, historically speaking, religion was used to help people govern their lives. It told them how to live prosperously. But the 20th century brought on all sorts of atheistic thinkers and philosophers, and this trend of finding both ethics and meaning outside of religious teachings, to Wells, spelled out the end of religion. But if religion is supposed to tell us what we are to do with our lives, and religion is gone, what do we do? Hence, the republished title of The Open Conspiracy, What Are We to Do with Our Lives? Wells proposed that we let religion die and allow that question to be answered by socialism. We let socialist principles guide our lives in the absence of the previous guiding force of religion. He then argues that a simple recognition and distrust of the systems in place are toothless. He said that religious devotion, both modern and disillusioned, has to take on the current systems and control the political discourse, or it is no more than a drug for easing discomfort, the opium of the peoples. So you said, and again, I quote, he wanted collectivism to be the opium of the masses. Now, forgiving the transcription of people to masses, which is quite common with this quote, there are two main issues. One, collectivism never appears anywhere in the Open Conspiracy. Not once. And two, he explicitly states that he does not want socialist thinking to be the opium of the peoples because that opium is vacuous and unhelpful. It simply pacifies. It doesn't solve anything. So, with my short little in defense of Wells out of the way, let's take a step back and have ourselves a quick little debunking speed round. How's that sound?
I realized who Aldous Huxley's family was. T.H. Huxley, the bulldog of Darwin, his brother Julian Huxley, and the role they played in eugenics.
Aldous and Julian Huxley were eugenicists. T.H. Huxley, though, was not a eugenicist.
The New Order of the Ages.
The New Order of the Ages? Huh. Where have I heard that before?
According to author John Purdue.
Ah, yes. John Purdue, the great author of one book, The War of All the People, the Nexus of Latin American Radicalism and Middle Eastern Terrorism. Sounds trustworthy, and also super relevant to this topic. Also, underneath that is an excerpt from a book by known AIDS denier, G. Edward Griffin. Also super trustworthy.
Edward R. Peace, who was very wealthy and actually worked on the London Stock Exchange before he received a huge inheritance that allowed him to basically retire and start funding all these labor and socialism causes. Very rich irony.
Yeah, I know, right? He redistributed his wealth to causes that promoted the redistribution of wealth. How ironic, right? Darn socialists, darn money-having socialists.
In the literary circles, in the academia circles, in the literary circles,
You said literary circles twice.
they supported, corporate monopolies.
Yeah, they didn't support corporate monopolies. They supported government imperialism because they thought that Africa and India couldn't govern themselves, which is really horrific. Just tell the truth. You don't have to lie to make the webs look bad. They did enough of that by themselves.
We walked by and they had some propaganda posters for climate change with a polar bear, on a melting ice cap and that kind of thing.
Global warming's real, all right? The last 5 years are the 5 hottest years since we started recording global temperatures nearly 150 years ago. I know that your massive brain barely lets us understand your superior intellect, but maybe, just maybe, you could do a study and have it peer-reviewed, and that might be enough to convince us all of the truth.
They're using the ancient black magic of the blacksmith's hammer and anvil.
Ugh, I really hope that was a joke. You know wizards aren't real, right? And that blacksmiths are real? And that means that blacksmiths can't be wizards. Right? Right? Right?
Hephaestus.
Hephaestus. Hephaestus. Hephaestus. So now, with the speed round down, I would like to draw your attention to 2 quotes from Mr. Truth himself in order to make my conclusion. The first one, which we've already discussed, is when he summarized the open conspiracy. But the second is one speaking about the book inside of 1984. It goes like this. The theory and practice of oligarchical collectivism. Oligarchical collectivism. A form of collectivism that ultimately benefits the oligarchy. A statement like this is ridiculous on the face of it. Imagine if my response was structured the same way. Understanding the Fabian window. The Fabian window. A window that is ultimately about the Fabians. This has to be the most vapid way of phrasing any sort of argument. But if you're not actually trying to make an argument, it's genius. Repeating scary words while scary images flash on screen is an excellent way to scare people. And while this will build you a loyal group of conspiracy-minded fans that don't really care about anything but what you have to say, it doesn't really hold any value when it comes to sussing out the truth. So, for the claim that the evil globalist cabal known as the Fabian Society is actually the group that inspired the work 1984, and that 1984 was written and titled for them. Citation needed.